The first time I applied for a job at Google, I didn't hear back from them for 3 months. Next time, I met someone who introduced me to Google, and I met this person at a social gathering. And within weeks, I had an offer letter in hand. I'm still the same person. But today, we get the job based on who we know, not what we know. And I was like, actually, making employment better is a very fundamental problem in our society. So that is what was the impetus to start Eightfold.
Welcome to the Startup Field Guide, where we learn from successful founders of unicorn startups how their companies truly found product market fit. I'm your host, Sandhya Hegde, and today we'll be diving into the story of Eightfold AI. Eightfold is a talent management platform used by hundreds of large organizations like Vodafone and Activision Blizzard. It helps them leverage data to find great people with the skills these companies need, both internally and externally. Last valued at over $2 billion, Eightfold was launched in 2016, and we are joined today by its CEO and co founder, Ashutosh Garg. Welcome to the Field Guide, Ashutosh.
Thank you, Sandhya, for hosting me. Super excited to be part of your podcast.
Thank you so much for joining us. And before maybe we dive into Eightfold, I'd love to actually go back and talk a little bit about your own career, your first startup, Bloomreach, as well. I know you were a very early hire at Google. It was 2004 when you joined Google. What was that experience like? And how did it contrast with kind of your previous roles, which had been at bigger companies?
Yeah, that sounds like ages now.
Yeah, I know. Can't believe it's 20 years ago.
Exactly. So I joined Google, as you mentioned, in 2004. Prior to that, I was at IBM for a short period, and before that, got my PhD. Now I say, fortunately, in machine learning and AI
Right.
from Elena Urbana Champaign. Actually, my experience at Google was quite interesting. And this was one of the probably the best days at Google. So I joined in, and I was told that you go figure out, do something good. My manager was like, yeah, I don't have time, just do what you want to do, right? But have an impact. And the beauty is that gave me, and the way I leveraged it is that what can I do to not only learn about the business, but this was the early innings of AI and machine learning, right? And back, even in those days, Google had access to billions of documents across the web, each and every activity users were making on Google platform, and access to thousands of machines. So I could go in over the weekends, run my own MapReduce jobs, and analyze the data to make sense out of it. Now, whether it is trying to use text to understand images, whether it is around learning about people to see who is likely to do what next in their career. Sorry. So, for example, as a buyer, right? You go to Google product search, what are you going to buy next? You go to
Right.
Google News, what news article you're going to read next? If you're going to Google Reader, there were RSS feedback in those days, what article you're going to read next, and so on and so forth. So it's building all those models. So the good thing is that over the years, I have always been a 0 to 1 person at some level. So even at Google, it was not about let me just become a part of a large product team which is already working on a mature product and make it incrementally better. But it was always about how can I invent something new over here. And in that sense, like when I started Bloomreach, that experience was very similar. It was about let's look at a problem from the first principle. Let's start from the ground zero and see how we can solve the problem of helping enterprises. And in case of Bloomreach, the problem that we were working on was in the early days was around search engine optimization. Till date, right? Google is the largest channel to drive
Right.
digital marketing. And every business depends on that, right? But it's almost a black box, like how those things work. And quite a few times companies just don't know what to do. What's the right thing to do? And as a result, sometimes people end up doing the wrong things, which ends up hurting the experience both at Google and them. So it was like, can we solve this problem through technology? So that was the early innings at Bloomreach that we started with. And that mindset of innovating, starting from 0 to 1, worked out really handy.
And so you went from being the CTO and technical co founder at Bloomreach to eventually starting Eightfold AI in 2016. What was the impetus and the founding insight for you? What made you say, okay, this time I'm going to be the CEO, I'm going to run this company. And surprisingly, it's going to be in HR tech, which I would argue is probably a lot less considered or less attractive space in SaaS. I'm sure you got that feedback from a lot of people when you started. So could you take us back to 2016 and share what was it like starting for a second time?
It's scary, but I think the way I approach the problems is that if there is a big fundamental problem and I feel like there is a path to solving it, then let's just go and make it happen. So I see myself more as a problem solver versus a technologist versus an engineer versus a product person or a go-to-market person. Give me a problem and I'll work on it. But if I know, I'll solve it. If I don't know, I will learn from others. And again, we'll go and try to solve it, right?
Right.
I was at Google, Bloomreach for 8 years and working on this problem of digital marketing, working with large enterprises, e-commerce companies, trying to see how we can help. And while that was really good and impactful, I felt there's something I always felt that something is missing in what I am doing. I wanted to do something that is very core and fundamental to our society. And initially I was looking more for things like education and healthcare.
Right.
In fact, I left Bloomreach to start a company in the healthcare space. But the aha moment for me was realizing that how important employment is for people. If I can help everyone get a better job, better career, the world will be a much, much better place. And then suddenly I recall the story that the first time I applied for a job at Google, I didn't hear back from them for 3 months. Next time I met someone who introduced me to Google, and I met this person at a social gathering. And within weeks, I had an offer letter in hand. I'm still the same person. But today we get the job based on who we know, not what we know. And I was like, actually, making employment better is a very fundamental problem in our society. So then let's just go and solve it. So that is what was the impetus to start Eightfold. And I think the advantage of the CEO role is that it gives you a broad spectrum. You no longer just focus on solving a technology problem or a product problem, but you can look at the problem holistically and say that
Right.
what is needed to solve this, right? That was the initial journey.
How did you go from the mission, right, which is okay, I want, and I love how big and fundamental that mission is. I think a lot of founders make the mistake of not thinking big enough, right? And then you're not able to attract like all the talent and attention you need to get started. So I love how big and fundamental this mission is of how do you make employment better for everybody? How did you go from that to, okay, here's the initial beachhead problem that we will solve for one specific customer?
Actually, I will start by telling a story on that one. In the early days at Bloomreach, pretty much every email that came to our website would come to me, like careers and jobs and support and info and all those, right? And I saw an application that came in. This person was finishing her PhD from Wisconsin Madison, one of the top database colleges, under the professor Jeffrey Norton, who was one of the most famous professors in the database space back in those days. And she was applying for a job at Bloomreach. So we interviewed her. But during the interview process, I asked her, why did you apply on our website? Why did you just reach out to someone? Right?
Right.
Almost in a black hole. And the reaction was, but Ashu, isn't that what we're supposed to do?
Right.
And there's a difference in that naivety, right? As an enterprise, we are like, oh, you know what? Good people never apply. We will just source the candidates, all those kind of things, right? And that was again an aha moment to realize that actually, if we really want to solve for employment, we have to really look at enterprises, what they are doing, because ultimately they are the employers. If we don't understand their processes, we don't solve for their challenges, we will never solve for the candidates or individuals. So that made us think about we need to really understand what's happening in enterprises, how they're looking at the profiles, how they're looking at people, how they're assessing people. Sometimes they say that it's harder to get a job within your own company than apply outside. Like how even internal mobility is happening. So that
Right.
forces us to think about let's look at enterprises and solve the problem for them. And then it started from there.
Got it. Oh, how long did it take you to get to, okay, here's a minimum viable product? And did you approach it as a design partnership? Were there customers that were helping you really think through the core jobs that this product would do for them? What were those early days like?
First, start by understanding the market. What is a market? What does the market needs? And what is a fundamental problem that needs to be solved in this market? And in the case of Eightfold, it was very clear that every enterprise is struggling to have the right people, and every individual is struggling to get the right job. So he said, this is the core fundamental problem that we are going to go after and solve. And now market is set. Then, and within that market, is this an important enough problem and a big enough problem? So what we did was, even before we raised a penny, we called numerous CHROs from organizations of varying sizes to better understand what are their pain points and does this pain point resonates or not? And if we were to build something to solve this problem, will they be interested in talking to us and buying our offering? And when you say, what is this problem, right? It was more around the first version, the MVP was, I will help you better assess, match the people to the right opportunities. And the answer we heard from all the CHROs was overwhelmingly yes. This is a hard problem, this is a tough problem, and we really need to solve this problem. Then, through friends, family network, we identified 5-10 customers and started working with them. Now, the journey, which is different for Eightfold, is very quickly we realized that actually the pain point is bigger in big companies than the smaller companies. So we very quickly pivoted to working with some of the largest enterprises across the globe and started talking to them.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Because the small companies, probably their first order problem is they don't have enough applicants, right? No one has heard of them.
They don't have enough applicants, they don't have enough, or the scale of the magnitude of the problem is much, much smaller.
Right.
And in that case, also the impact you can have on those companies is smaller in the early days, right?
Makes sense. And I'm curious, with large companies being slower adopters of new software, take much longer to work with startups and have procurement cycles. How did you deal with all that? Given that as a small startup, the thing you need the most is velocity in the early days. Was that challenging? Any kind of tips for other founders who also need bigger companies to be early adopters rather than that just are not solving a problem that is relevant to the typical fast movers?
I think in our case, I would say the problem is so important, so critical, so severe. To be honest, even I'm surprised. Some of the largest companies across the globe are our customers. And it's not that they're buying it for part of their organization or one team here and there. With Eightfold, it is a wall-to-wall deployment. And even in the early days, they were deploying us in 20 plus countries. But yes, is procurement going to take time? The answer is yes. Will you have to go through massive scrutiny? The answer is yes. And the common wisdom is don't start over there.
Right.
So I totally hear it. But now, again, as an entrepreneur, whatever is the challenge for the person, there lies an opportunity for you. And a very interesting example I will give you over here is if you want to sell to public sector, especially the Department of Defense and three-letter agencies and so on, there's this concept of FedRAMP certification that you have to go through. And anyone who has gone through that will tell you how painful it is. But what I can tell you is that it's probably 1000x more painful if you are a 10,000 employee company than if you are a 50 employee company. You put things together in the right way, the better it is for you. So sometimes while early days may look more painful, selling and working with large enterprises, the foundation that it enables is so much more valuable in the long term. So yes, we have to bite that, and that also tests how important and critical of the problem it is that you are solving.
Right.
But if you can break through that, you will be super successful.
Yeah, because that's almost now your competitive advantage, right? The fact that you invested in that early. I'm curious, what would you say are like some of the fundamental choices you made that helped you get these massive Fortune 50 companies as early adopters? Are there specific architecture choices, compliance choices? What were the things that made a difference?
It will sound like a cliche, just hire the right people. And of course, this is not just a cliche, it is coming also from an HR company who have done it, and there are people who have not done it. And the people who have not done it have no idea how to even approach it. And in my case, in our Eightfold case, we were fortunate enough to have the right team in place on day one. So whether it is about, say, as an engineer, I would say that solving the engineering problem on the architecture and infrastructure is the easiest part of the puzzle. When I was at Google, we were building systems that could scale to billions of queries a day.
Right.
So that was not a problem for us, right? I think with cloud, building secure systems is no longer that hard. You can do that, right? All that infrastructure is available. But being aware of what kind of challenges other enterprises have, like when they are procuring your solution, right? What are they looking for? what kind of compliance they're looking for. Understanding that is very important. And in our case, actually, we apply AI in the HR space, and it's a highly sensitive area. While outside HR, yes, you can talk about it, it's a lot of fun and excitement, right? But as soon as you start talking about AI in HR, then the question of bias, responsible AI, ethical AI, all those things come in. So in our case, what we did was from day one, we worried about those things. And partly because our mission was not, and my investors may not like it, but I'll just say it, right? That my mission was not how to maximize the shareholder value. My mission was how to solve for employment. And if I'm solving for employment, how do I solve it for everyone in a unbiased, ethical fashion? So we started focusing on those things from day one. And that has become a massive advantage over other companies now that we've scaled.
Makes sense. Because now, when they are figuring out what their internal governance policy is for this, they can count on you and your kind of previous investment in that direction.
Absolutely. And other one is that quite a few times people think that it's a product and engineering problem, selling to large enterprises. Are you ready for that or not?
Right.
Actually, equally important is, do you have a go to market organization that knows how to sell to large enterprise? Like you can't just go find one person and say that here's my product, buy it, right? You have to go through the hoops, you have to navigate their organization, you have to find multiple champions, you have to understand their procurement process, you have to understand their buying cycle, the legalities of what they're going to ask you, right? So you have to really not only be strong on the technology and product side, but equally strong on the go-to-market side.
Makes sense. And any surprises for you? If you think about the first couple of years, what you thought the product needed to be, the go to market needed to be, any surprises that you adapted to along the way?
The world has been full of surprises.
Yeah. Well, what were some of the more memorable things from like 2017, for example?
You mean to say outside COVID and outside AI and outside?
Yeah, before the big macro shocks just started hitting you one at a time.
One of the very funny one, I would say. Actually, you mentioned like selling into HR, right? You could say that I have no HR experience. Before Eightfold, I didn't even know what HR systems look like. So we got into this new space,
Right.
and people would ask me, Ashu, but you don't know anything about HR. And frankly, one of the reasons why we have been successful, and the most successful of all the companies in our space that started around the same time, is because we had no HR experience.
Why do you say
And
that?
the reason is quite a few times as an insider, you are too constrained in your thinking by what you have already seen. And as an outsider, you are able to bring a fresh perspective to the problem. So, a very simple example was as you think of the hiring, right? I was like, whether you're hiring an internal person or an external person, right? It should be the same concept. 7 years later, that seems, wow, that was such an insightful thing. At that time, it was more of a naivety again that let's just build that. And you can have internal candidates come in and external candidates come in. And I still remember talking to one of my early customers. So we pitched to them, we sold them. As they were implementing, they called me. They were like, Ashu, you said that we can also use our internal employees to be matched to a job through your system. I was like, I don't remember if I said that, but if I said that, sure, we can do that, right?
Right. Sounds like something I would have said.
It sounds like something I would have said. But as I reflect on the market now, internal mobility is another multi-billion dollar market by itself.
Right.
And in that moment, we said, yeah, sure, it's the same problem. The same system can solve both things for you. So those kind of simple decisions, partly because you were an outsider in this space, helped us actually do much better.
Makes sense. You also avoid some of the pessimist traps of this hasn't worked in the past, which can be valuable.
Exactly.
Maybe speaking of things working in the past, if you had to contrast your early days at Bloomreach with your early days at Eightfold, what did you consciously do differently and thoughtfully say, okay, I'm going to do it differently this way because of the learnings you had at Bloomreach?
The journey with Eightfold is still going on for me, so we'll see. Some of the things that we have focused on or done differently is the focus on market has been huge. Like at Bloomreach, especially in the early days, we always struggle to figure it out how big our TAM is. And quite a few times, what you do is you take this top-down approach and say that there's so many people in the world, so much marketing spend, so that is our TAM, right? And which makes sense, which is fine, but that is not your true addressable market, actually. I mean, your true addressable market is really a function of what product you have that you're selling today, who's a buyer. If you were to just replicate to 10,000 more companies, right? And with companies, what happens every time they come across a new customer, very rarely it becomes a question of how do I disqualify this customer? Oh, we should say no to this because this customer doesn't meet these 50 criteria for me, right? So one thing, another thing that we did very differently at Eightfold was always focused on TAM. Are we solving a big, important enough problem in a large market or not? So one example manifestation of this is many people in the early days were telling us, yeah, I think this is an important problem. Why don't we solve it for Bay Area tech companies? Or why don't we solve it for technology talent? And my thing was that if I'm learning from the data, I don't care whether it is a technology talent or a marketing talent or a sales talent or someone else, right? It's a horizontal problem, and let me just approach it solving it horizontally. And the beauty of this is that we have never worried about TAM and Eightfold. Every company under the sun is a potential customer for us. So I would say that's one very interesting example of what we have done differently. But it's a long list and I can go on and on for it.
Any disadvantages of being a repeat founder? Is there something that you feel like, okay, I assumed too much because that's how it had happened in the past, for instance?
I would say the trap that people get into is the expectations are high
Hmm.
second time in the market. And as a result, sometimes you are like, I'm not going to work on a small problem.
Right.
I need to raise $50 million on day one versus $2 million. I need to have a big team on day one versus a small team, right? But frankly, whether you're a second time founder, a third time founder, fourth time founder, you still don't know much. You're still learning every day, right? You're back on ground zero where no one cares about you, no one knows you, right? And just get into the grind again. And I think if you do that, then you can minimize most of the, uh, the things that can go wrong. Sometimes there's a pessimism that can come in. Sometimes second time things may not go as well as your first time, and you can get depressed very quickly. So you have to always make sure that you stay grounded.
And this time, obviously, you've had a much more volatile macroeconomic climate, right? With COVID, everyone works remote. Now everyone has to come back to office, and there's war, and the market is going crazy. Like, what has been the impact on kind of the labor market and how companies think about employment, retention, hiring? What has that looked like when all these macro shifts have happened over the past 4 years?
I think if anything, all these macro shifts have highlighted how important talent is for enterprise. In today's time and age, the only thing that will make or break companies is do they have the right people to succeed or not. And more companies are realizing that. Now, at any point in time, in the short term, it creates some issues. So, for example, when COVID happened, first 3 months looked like gloom and doom for everyone. In our industry, what happened is that pre-COVID, the primary focus of the market was how do I hire people from outside? During COVID, the focus shifted to how do I manage my own employees? As the recovery happened from COVID, the focus again now balance between hiring from outside and internal talent. Last 1 year, for example, like there seems to be no end to layoffs in Bay Area. Companies are still scrambling, trying to figure it out, right? So there have been a lot of shifts in the talent space, but the focus on the importance of this problem has not decreased. If anything, it has gone up multi-folds. And as a startup, the thing that works in our favor is that if we are agile, we can adopt edges very quickly. Second is because we took a platform approach, saying that ultimately it's about talent. It's not about one part of the journey, but the entire funnel, right? Entire process has helped us actually not only survive, but thrive.
Makes sense. I'm curious how you're thinking about the future at Eightfold AI. What does the new innovation happening in generative AI, like how does that impact the Eightfold vision, the product roadmap, and how are you thinking about your executive team? I noticed you have added a co-CEO to the table. Would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, those are multiple questions. I'll start by one at a time, right? I think with generative AI, frankly, at some level, what will happen in the future is uncertain. What we can see is that the amount of advances over last 1 year are more than we have ever seen. The rate at which things are evolving is much faster than ever. So one part which is very obvious one is that how do we leverage generative AI in the Eightfold platform? So from simple things like how do you write better emails? How do you better communicate to candidates and employees? How do you write better job descriptions? How do you better index, search the content? How do you answer the HR questions a lot more efficiently? How do people create better resumes and profiles?
Right.
How do you use it to do the automated assessment or automatically identifying questions to ask people? Variety of things you can apply generative AI on, right? The next extension of this is that, as they are saying, right, generative AI, think of it as a replacement of a browser, and now everything can be done through a chatbot, right? Providing those kind of interfaces through Eightfold is another big focus area for us. So I think that's one big bucket that we're working on. But the second one, which is probably even more interesting and exciting, is as a result of what we are doing, but not only what we are doing, what every other company is doing out there, the way the work is being done is very different. If the way the work is being very different, what is the implication of that on the employment market? Like 4 years from now, Sandhya, how will your job look like? Maybe today you do 2 interviews a day, 2 podcasts a day. 4 years from now, you might be doing 8 a day. And number of other things might get automated, right? And you can now apply the same logic to each and every function in each and every organization. Second big area where Eightfold AI is focused on is thinking through how the nature of the work is changing and how can we help large enterprises understand the future of workforce and then provide them tools and technologies to guide them through the transformation. So in that sense, we are more excited than ever. While the world is uncertain, what is certain is until all of us are living on social security benefits, you will need employment, you will need a purpose in life, and 840i is here to support, guide people through that process. The second question you asked, I'm sure many people are curious, right? What's going on? Is Ashu leaving? Why are you bringing a co-CEO? Why is it a decision? And you talked about the product market fit as well, right? This is one of the key topics of your podcast, right? I feel like one of the biggest mistakes founders make is that they are too much in love with their own product. What matters is the problem or the solution to customers' problem. What does not matter is your product, right? Similarly, like as a CEO, as a founder, sometimes you care too much about your own job, your own power, your own authority, and you want to be in control of everything that is happening in the company. What you don't realize is that there are many things that you don't know. And I'm a big believer in if I have a team which is better than me, nothing like that. So in our case, we have brought in Chano Fernandez as our co-CEO, as my co-CEO. If you look at all the people in the enterprise space, there's very handful of people who will have a experience similar to Chano, being at the helm of a 80, $90 billion company, building a business with $6, $7 billion ARR and so on, right? And of course, there are very few people in the world who have that level of experience, maybe 5, 10 at most. And there's only one person in the world who has an experience in HR space doing that.
Right.
So I couldn't have found a better partner in this journey to bring on board to see how we can grow Eightfold. And this is more of a testament to employment is not a small problem. It's not a problem for just you and me or only the people who cannot get a job. It is everyone's problem at all levels. The amount of money that gets spent on talent is north of $1 trillion. The productivity impact for not because of not having right talent is north of multi-trillion dollars across the globe. And I think if you want to build a generational company in this space, I will use all the help I can get in the world. And Chano was a great addition to the team, or is a great addition to the team.
Yeah, quite the catch. I think he's like pretty much the only person who's also has experience with the co-CEO model, which you're making it sound like it's easy, but I know like how much humility and emotional intelligence it takes to make that work.
Thank you.
I'm curious, you talked a little bit about this, but how do you think the broader labor market will change? Clearly, there'll be more and more skills that maybe are not nothing ever gets fully automated away if history is an indicator of the future, but there's this level of kind of accessibility and commoditization of skills as things get more automated. I'm curious, what do you see as some of the big impacts on the labor market happening over the next few years? What to you is obvious will happen, and what are some big question marks?
I think multiple things that are likely to happen. Automation is happening, and there are many jobs, or maybe at least there are few jobs that will get automated fully. Then there are a number of jobs where a large portion of the activity will get automated. Third is what makes someone an expert in a certain job. That definition is going to change. And actually, that to me is the biggest labor market impact. So, to give a bit more color on that, if you take software engineering, 20 years back, if I were to go back to my days of coding, I was very good in algorithms. I was very good in system design, but I was very slow in typing. I still always had to look at the keyboard as I was typing. And that made me a good programmer, but not a great programmer because my speed was slow. Today, that skill set no longer matters. In fact, knowing coding language won't matter in 4 years from now.
Right.
So the skill set required to be a great programmer will change.
Right. So I'm no longer asking, do you know this, but do you have experience coding in this particular language is
It
suddenly
won't
an
matter.
irrelevant interview question.
Can you design well? Because of the access to Galley and all kind of other things, right? So basically automation of a number of activities and changing definition of what requires someone to be successful in a job. If you take these three things on one axis, the other axis is that what does the new generation wants in their career? It's no longer I need to have a job to earn money, but it's also to find a purpose. And if you combine these two things, the workforce of tomorrow is going to look very different from the workforce of today. And the other thing is that the rate at which these things will change is going to be faster than ever. The implication is that people will have shorter tenures. Even further, you will see a lot more agile workforce. Companies no longer getting organized by departments and functions, but by task and skill set. It will mean that not everyone is going to be a full-time employee. You may take specialized jobs across 5 companies in parallel. So we are up for a lot of change. 5 years back, we would have never imagined remote work. Now that's a norm.
Right.
So I think we are up for all those changes. Now it will depend on how fast these technologies come in, how fast they get adopted by organizations, right? It may take a bit longer than all of us anticipate right now. But once adoption starts, it will go much faster. And those are the kind of things I'm anticipating going to happen in the coming years.
No, I'm really fascinated by that idea of if you take shorter tenures, which is already a trend, and you take that to much more of an extreme, you take the idea of specializing in tasks rather than the knowledge, which is a bit more commoditized if there are knowledge bases that are accessible to everybody. Fascinated by that idea of, okay, am I just like doing a specialized task for multiple employers? Do you think companies are thinking about this or preparing for this future already, or it's too much? And do you see anybody kind of thinking through what their organization might need to look like in 5 years?
Actually, it sounds like a very foreign idea, right? What I'm saying. But think about doctors, right? If you were to hear a doctor that the same doctor is working both with UCSF and Stanford, will that surprise you? Probably
No.
not.
Yeah. No.
This doctor goes through 5 different clinics over a period of month. It won't surprise you, right? But today, if you were to hear that this engineer goes through Google and Facebook, you'll be like, what's going on? That's another, cannot happen, right? If you were to say this lawyer works at 2 firms or does private practice and also works at a firm, it won't surprise you, right? That that is anytime you get into super specialization, task-based specialization, that actually becomes very common. So can that happen? I think that should certainly happen. And actually companies have started thinking about it already. And we already have few customers. So we recently launched an offering around resource management. which is around agile workforce, project-based workforce. And we are seeing a massive adoption of that already in the market. So I feel like the trend is happening in that direction. It's only going to get accelerated.
Makes sense. Maybe as we wrap up, any advice to first time founders getting started, especially as a part of this AI hype cycle? What would be your advice to them?
Entrepreneurship is a great thing. Go do it. Yes, you will have tough days, but this is the most fun thing you will ever do. But because you also mentioned the AI hype cycle, don't do it because something is hot today.
Right.
Do it because you believe that something will be relevant for next 10 plus years. If you think the problem that you're solving is going to stay important for next 10 years, go jump on and do it. But if it is only for next 2, 3 years, you may still get lucky and you may build something and sell it to someone.
Right.
But that is not the recipe for success in the long term. So just welcome to entrepreneurship.
Awesome. Those are perfect words to end this podcast on. Thank you so much for your time, Ashu. It was fabulous chatting with you about Eightfold, about the impact AI can have on the labor market, and your links as a successful repeat founder. I've learned so much from this. Thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thank you, Sandhya. Thank you for hosting me. Super excited for this conversation.
You've been listening to the Startup Field Guide with Sandhya, an Unusual Ventures podcast. Stay connected with us by subscribing to the show in your favorite podcast player. If you liked what you heard, please rate our show and help us reach more aspiring founders with lessons on how to find product market fit. Thanks for listening. Until next time.